everyone, thank you for joining another video. Today you can listen to the speech delivered by Ms. Lauren Honcop and Dr. Ravi Prabhakaran, at the Human Rights Day event held in Granville, Australia, on the occasion of International Human Rights Day on 7th of December 2025. For nearly a decade, Lauren has been deeply involved in refugee and asylum seeker advocacy, beginning her work with Canberra Refugee Action and continuing to support communities through policy engagement, direct assistance, and grassroots organising. Her long-standing dedication reflects a genuine commitment to justice, dignity, and meaningful reform. This year, Lauren joined Labour for Refugees and now serves as the NSW ACT co-convener and Assistant Secretary, using her platform to push for fairer policies, accountability, and stronger protections for refugees across Australia. On Human Rights Day, she highlighted the urgent need for humane, principled reform and emphasised that national decision-making must be shaped by the lived experiences of those who have fled genocide, persecution, and state violence. Her contribution reinforced that legal advocacy and political responsibility must work together to end harm and deliver justice. We thank Lauren Honcop for her commitment to principled reform and for standing in solidarity with Eelam Tamils and all communities impacted by genocide and displacement.
Thank you so much for that incredibly warm welcome and introduction. I'm a bit overwhelmed, to be frank. I'm just an ordinary person, I'm not a politician, and I'm honoured to be on this podium with significant politicians who have spent decades speaking in honour of and for the necessity of human rights, and with the wonderful Ian Rintoul and with Associate Professor Jake Lynch, whom I've not heard before. So it's quite overwhelming to know that the people in this room are carrying the weight of the memory of inherited trauma in such numbers. And of course, because of my personal connections with a different community, namely the Hazara community, I know that you're not alone in being in Australia as asylum seekers and refugees, carrying the weight of inherited trauma, of what you have suffered. Before I go further, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here this evening on the lands of the Darug people, as we all are, and as everyone else has, pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and thank the Darug for their care for this place and for their leadership. We who are not Indigenous to this land benefit greatly from First Nations people's care and leadership every single day. That Australian voters rejected the very small constitutional change of a voice to Parliament tells us there is a lot of work to be done to achieve human rights for all. I'm going to tell you an anecdote which happened just the other day. Every now and then I spend a little bit of time on Facebook. Perhaps some of the rest of you do this as well. My local member, whose name is Alicia Payne, she's the member for Canberra in the ACT. I'm from the ACT. I'm actually from Sydney, but I live in the ACT. Was in a photograph with a number of Palestinian refugees. And she was welcoming the Palestinian refugees to Canberra and hoping that their future would be better in Canberra than obviously it was in Palestine. So I decided to write a couple of paragraphs. I don't do this very often, but I decided to write a couple of paragraphs about how welcome they were and how I knew from my volunteering with an organisation called Canberra Refugee Support, which is an entirely volunteer community organisation, that I knew they would receive the kind of support and welcome in the community that would help them to settle as well as is possible given the history they bring with them in their lives. Well, I got piled on. Do you know the expression piled on? You know, a whole lot of people came out of nowhere, complete strangers, it's only on a screen after all, they're not really hurting me, are they? To tell me all sorts of things about myself which were news to me. I didn't know. I thought I was quite a nice person, but apparently not. And so there I was, you know, actually feeling a kind of precarious revulsion at words on a screen. And that is nothing compared with what people have gone through in real life as they watch bloodiness and murder and suffering. So I tell you that anecdote not to feel sorry for me, and I restrained myself and was extremely polite in response, but to say that I'm quite fearful, actually, about the state of human rights in the general community, not because I think your average member of the general community is a horrible person. I don't believe that. I may be naive, perhaps I'm Pollyanna, but because I think when people are influenced and when they don't get out more and when they don't, as Jake has said, hear stories from real people who are their neighbours, then they can be easily persuaded by ideas such as the fact that I can't pay my gas bill must be the fault of a refugee. I happen to be, I found out relatively recently, the grandchild of refugees from fascist Italy. And it does explain to me why I was schooled, really, at the table, at the dining table, on the impacts of upon ordinary people of fear-mongering when the economy is just not suiting you very well or when you happen to be suffering yourself. It's so easy to point to the refugee. It's so easy to point to the person with the accent, the person who is a different skin colour and goes to a different form of worship than yourself. So I'm quite fearful about it. But, you know, I figure that there's 52% of Australians, apparently, who have at least one parent born overseas. I have two. I'm just an average person. I do have the benefit of having a double degree, going to UNSW in the 1970s, and being at the pointy end of what was then a bit of a feminist revolution, but also a First Nations revolution. Some of the first First Nations Aboriginal law students were at my university with me, I'm very grateful to say. And it was a time in which I think we had some perhaps romantic ideas about how kind and caring and welcoming we Australians all are when things are good. When things are good, people can be nice. When things are suddenly not good, they can be easily whipped up, and I find that very scary. So, I agree with Ian Rintoul, and I imagine everybody else, that in no way is the battle over for human rights. I think there should be human rights for all, not just citizens, also non-citizens, every resident, whether you walk through the door for a couple of days to go holidaying in Sydney or you happen to stay for decades waiting for your visa, there should be human rights for all. And that's one of the reasons I am a member of Labour for Refugees. It's not the only organisation I'm part of. I'm also part of a policy committee in Canberra, and I'm also part of a couple of volunteer communities. I've mentioned Canberra Refugee Support. I'm also the secretary of an organisation called the Sievex Memorial Association, ACT, which looks after a memorial which you'd be very welcome to visit anytime. Please be in touch. To over 300 Iraqi refugees who died attempting to find safety. Everybody knows how risky it is to flee your own country. Every refugee I know has said to me, you do not get on a boat and risk your life unless the land is worse. We know that, yeah? And we mustn't forget it, ever. It's one of the reasons I belong to Labour for Refugees, and I want to just explain what Labour for Refugees is. First of all, here's the Labour for Refugees table. Wave, please wave. Thank you. We're not a branch or a sub-branch of the Labor Party of the ACT or New South Wales. We're a group comprised of party members and trade unionists. We don't speak for the Australian Labor Party. Since 2001, Labour for Refugee members have been seeking a just and fair Labor Party policy on refugees and people seeking asylum. Next year's our quarter century. I wish the job was done. I really wish it was, but apparently it's not, and it's not going to be anytime soon, so we've got to keep working really, really hard. We've been at the forefront of advocating for progressive reforms to the Labor Party's policies for all that time. Our ongoing work is grounded in the belief that Australia must uphold humane, just and effective policies for those who seek refuge within its borders, and I would say beyond. Our influence is evident in successive improvements to Labor's national platform. Definitely not all the wins we would want, but what's there is often thanks to Labor for Refugees and thanks to the agitations and the demonstrations that are held outside politicians' offices, without a doubt. I've done a fair bit of demonstrating myself. I've stood on quite a few corners in Canberra. I've been spat upon. I regard it as an honour. As I held a sign about refugees, it was quite interesting. It was really quite a well-directed spit from a truck. Since Labor came to government in May 2022, we've had to do a bit of adjusting, I think would be the way to describe it. And especially, I'd say, since May 2025, but we are adjusting and we're working out how we work. We write letters. We make submissions to parliamentary inquiries. There's one coming up shortly, as Senator Shoebridge has been influential in that. In departmental consultations, we seek meetings with political leaders and get them. We meet with other refugee advocacy groups. We advocate for individuals, and are often quite successful, and for reform of laws. Every word that was spoken about the Migration Act is absolutely true. It is a ghastly piece of legislation. Where do you start? 501 is a very good place to start, and anyone who would like to hear my raves about 501, I'm just over the table there, happy to talk, and I do talk a lot. So most recently, as an example of our work, we carried out a campaign of reform on the Disability Discrimination Act 1992, which had some success last year and which this year continues to seek removal of the exemption from the coverage of the Disability Discrimination Act for the Migration Act. In other words, at the moment, if a Migration Act decision is going to be made in relation to a person who, of course, is a non-citizen, because citizens are not affected by the Migration Act directly, non-citizens, of course, are all subject to the Migration Act, a decision can be made under the Migration Act, currently in complete breach of the Disability Discrimination Act. We're inclined to see, well, our impression is that the government is listening to us and understands that it's a very odd situation, given that there is no such exemption for the Sex Discrimination Act or the Race Discrimination Act or the Human Rights Commission Act, or indeed in relation to state and territory anti-discrimination legislation. There is still an exemption under the Age Discrimination Act, so that's the next one we're going after, or we might do it at the same time. There's quite a long list of the achievements of Labor for Refugees. We've brought leaflets and pamphlets, so if you want to read about it, you can. What Ian said about the current visa granting is in fact correct, and I totally agree with him that it took a very, very concerted campaign of a lot of people who walked a large number of kilometres, including to Canberra, and who stood on a lot of corners and did a lot of yelling. So all power to you for doing that if you were there, and all power to the people who do it. That's really what I wanted to talk to you about. It is hard in a circumstance in which it looks like people overwhelmingly voted for something that included not thinking about refugees. One of the features of the last election was that refugees were not much spoken about. I agree that if we were to put it in newspapers that were not dominated by a particular family or a particular group, we might find that we might hear from the voices of people who really need to have those voices heard. Nothing about us without us is an absolutely fantastic phrasing. In fact, I just checked it on my phone because I was aware of it from before, and I reminded myself that back in 2019, which was the year I decided to join a refugee support organisation and do a lot more stuff than I had been doing before. From 2015, I should say, I was involved with Canberra Refugee Action Campaign, and that was when I was standing on corners being spat at. And that's a fantastic organisation, which Ian would know, run by Sophie Singh and John Minns, not related to Chris. So there is a UNHCR Global Refugee Network, which was formed in 2019, which has the signature "Nothing about us without us," but we know how much money the UNHCR now does not have. So that's all a bit sad. So that's what I wanted to say. We mustn't give up. Human rights for all really, really matter. We don't want a Human Rights Act which is only for citizens. We don't want carve-outs for people who are on visas. What we want is proper human rights legislation, and we do definitely need to reform the Migration Act. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you.
Dr. Ravi Prabhakaran sent a message from London for Human Rights Day, sharing his insights as a former lecturer at the University of Jaffna and a respected military and political analyst. In his message, he spoke with clarity about the ongoing genocide faced by the Eelam Tamil people, placing state violence, militarisation, and repression within a wider political and military context. He highlighted how genocide is not only carried out through war, but sustained through structures of power, denial, and international silence. We thank Dr. Ravi Prabhakaran for his message and for standing in solidarity with Eelam Tamils in the continued call for justice and accountability.
My greeting to the speakers, delegates, and everyone participating in this conference. The 10th of this month marks International Human Rights Day declared by the United Nations. This day exists to remind the nations that human rights and the fundamental rights must shape daily life. Yet the Eelam Tamil people still cannot enjoy these rights, even in the 21st century. Instead, they continue to face systematic violations. During Cyclone Titwa, the north and east were hit hardest. One reason was that the Sri Lankan government failed to provide the warning instruction in Tamil. This was not an accident. It reflects a pattern of neglect and discrimination that has shaped state policy for decades. Last month, a Buddha statue was illegally installed in Tringamala, the Tamil capital. This happened with support of Sri Lankan police. This is part of broader effort to occupy the Tamil ancient land and erase Tamil heritage. These acts are a tool of cultural genocide designed to enforce singular Buddhist dominance. United Nations has already recognized that the Sri Lankan government committed series of human rights violations during and before the final phase of the war in 2009. Several resolutions have followed. Yet 16 years later, the victims have received no justice. This year, the UN chose our daily essentials as a theme for International Human Rights Day. It highlights how human rights guide our everyday lives, even when we do not see it. As UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk said, it links human rights to our needs, fears, hopes, benefits. For Eelam Tamil people, accountability remained absent. Justice remained out of reach. No mechanism has been created by the UN or the international community to protect the fundamental right of the Tamils or to protect future abuses. Tamil have repeatedly called for the Sri Lanka to be referred to the International Criminal Court (ICC) or for a special tribunal similar to those established for the Rwanda and Yugoslavia. The international community has not acted. The UN framework for genocide prevention includes investigations, accountability, and the responsibility to protect victims. It also supports international court and evidence gathering systems. It recognizes that the genocides begin with human rights violations. Human Rights Day exists to affirm the rights of all peoples. But the affirmation means nothing without justice and accountability. The mass graves now being uncovered in the north are not isolated incidents. They are connected to a history that stretches from Black July to Muliwaikal. The mothers of the disappeared have protested for more than 3,000 days asking for answers. They have no answers, no apologies, no justice. After Muliwaikal, the United Nations' own internal review acknowledged it failed to protect the Tamil people. 16 years later, the same failure is repeated itself. One of the core problems is that Tamil do not yet have a unified mechanism capable of pushing the international community to act. Accountability does not happen automatically. History shows that it requires sustained pressure and organized leadership. Today, we lack Eelam Tamil organization willing and able to provide that push. On this Human Rights Day, we call the Sri Lankan government to stop violation against Eelam Tamil people, release all political prisoners held without due process, and reveal the fate of the forcibly disappeared. The global Tamil community must stand together on these demands. Today, we remember the victims and survivors of human rights violation and genocide committed against the Tamil people. We ask Tamil Eelam, the Indian Ocean region, and the world to unite in support of justice, dignity, and lasting peace for our people. Thank you.